It was the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat and your own doubts. If James Carver had known what he was about to witness in that library, maybe he would have turned around, claimed he'd forgotten his keys, and gone home to his empty apartment. But life never gave him that choice. He had always believed his school was colorblind, that merit spoke louder than skin, that the policies he signed off on were fair. But that night, with one flickering lamp casting a pool of gold over a dark-skinned girl, hunched over numbers no one else dared to touch, those beliefs would be tested and broken. The clock above the main desk read 11:57 p.m. Technically, the building had been closed for nearly an hour. But as Principal Carver pushed open the heavy oak door, the faint scratch of a pencil reached his ears. It was the kind of sound you notice when everything else is still. He walked slowly, each step echoing through the narrow aisles. Rows upon rows of dusty books framed his path, their spines like watchful eyes. And then, in the farthest corner, he saw her. A young black woman, no more than 17, in a faded hoodie 2 sizes too big, sat at the lone table still lit. Her braids were tied back in a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She leaned over a yellow legal pad covered in looping equations, the kind that looked like they belonged in a graduate-level physics course, not in the hands of a high school senior. Her name was Amara Johnson. He knew her face from the attendance sheets, knew her GPA was a point higher than anyone else in her grade, knew she had applied for the state's most competitive math scholarship. But he didn't know her like this, raw, unfiltered, stripped of the formal politeness students wore like armor in the daylight. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice sharper than intended. She flinched, straightened in her chair, but didn't hide the paper. "Evening, Principal Carver. You know you're not supposed to be here this late." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I figured the library didn't close for people who were learning." It wasn't the words that stopped him. It was the way she said people, the pause, the wait. She didn't have to finish the sentence for him to hear it. "People like me." He glanced at the equations sprawled before her. Complex integrals, multivariable functions, proofs that spiraled across the page like constellations. He wasn't sure he could solve them himself without a few hours and a cup of coffee. "You're working on Dr. Feldman's problem set?" he asked. That problem set was infamous. It wasn't even assigned to seniors, only to the AP Calculus group in the special enrichment program. "I'm working on the real one," she said quietly. "The one he gives to his university students." Carver blinked. "How did you even, does it matter?" she interrupted, not looking up. It did matter, at least to him. The enrichment program had quietly, very quietly been invitation only for the last 6 years. Invitations that, coincidentally or not, had never gone to students who looked like her. He could have told her to pack up and leave. He could have written her up for breaking rules. He could have done what every handbook told him to do. Instead, he stepped closer. "Miss Johnson, why are you here?" "Really?" This time, she looked him dead in the eye. Her pupils were wide, reflecting the lamplight like polished obsidian. "Because I don't want to give anyone an excuse to say I wasn't good enough." Something in the way she said it cut deeper than he expected. He thought of the last board meeting, when one of the trustees, a man in a too-tight bow tie who loved to talk about tradition, had leaned back and said, "Some kids just don't have the right foundation for higher learning." He remembered nodding, not because he agreed, but because disagreement was exhausting. And now here she was, building her own foundation at midnight, alone. He glanced around the library. The fluorescent lights above the front desk had been turned off, leaving only her corner bathed in that stubborn pool of gold. The rest of the room was shadows and silence. "You know," he said carefully, "sometimes working harder than everyone else doesn't mean they'll treat you the same." Amara's jaw tightened. "I know. That's why I have to be better than everyone else." No excuses, no second chances. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the world was fairer than that. But the words stuck in his throat, because he wasn't sure he believed them anymore. The sound of the rain tapping against the tall windows filled the pause between them. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized he'd never seen her name on the enrichment roster, though she clearly had the skill. "Who told you couldn't join the program?" he asked. Her laugh was short and bitter. "No one had to tell me. I've been in this school for 4 years. I can read between the lines." He studied her face. The quiet defiance. The fatigue. The determination that looked like it had been forged in a place far older than 17 years. "You're not supposed to be here," he said again, but his tone had shifted softer, almost uncertain. "Neither are you," she replied. For a moment, he almost smiled. He should have left. He should have done the responsible, administrative thing. But something about this scene, the rain, the lamp, the numbers looping endlessly across her page made him stay. "Show me," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Show me how you're solving it." There was a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "Why?" "Because," he said slowly, "I want to understand what it is you're willing to break the rules for." Amara hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the pencil as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him with the thing she had fought to protect: her work, her mind, her proof that she belonged here. But then, without a word, she turned the notebook toward him. "This," she began, tapping the top equation, "is the core of the problem: a multivariable optimization with a nonlinear constraint. Most people try to isolate one variable first, but that's a trap. You lose the relationship between the dimensions. The trick is to think of them as a single organism." Carver leaned forward. Her voice had shifted into the rhythm of someone who was teaching, not just answering. Her pencil danced across the page, sketching curves, crossing out false starts, rewriting cleaner versions underneath. He felt like he was watching an artist mid-performance, the kind where you can't predict the next stroke, but know it's inevitable. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said without looking up. "Mostly after midnight. I used the back entrance near the science wing. No one notices." He wanted to tell her she was risking too much. He wanted to warn her about security cameras, janitors, policies. But a small, dangerous part of him admired her audacity. "You're not worried someone might think you're stealing?" Or her head snapped up. "Do you think they'd wonder that if I didn't look like me?" The question landed like a stone in his chest. He didn't answer. She went back to writing, her pencil racing as though she had to finish before the clock caught up to her. "You asked why I'm here? Because I've seen what happens when people like me wait for permission. They graduate, get told they almost qualified, and spend the rest of their lives wondering if they could have made it. I'm not living like that." He was quiet for a moment, the only sound the scratch of her pencil and the distant hum of the rain outside. "You know," he said finally, "when I started teaching, I thought all I had to do was treat everyone equally, and the rest would take care of itself." "How's that working out for you?" she asked dryly. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Not as well as I'd hoped." Something in his tone made her glance at him, really look at him for the first time that night. His suit was immaculate, but his tie was loosened, and there were faint shadows under his eyes. Not the kind you get from one bad night's sleep, but the kind that take years to set in. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep," he said, which was true, but not complete. The real reason was that he'd been reviewing next semester's budgets, trying to figure out how to keep the enrichment program funded without cutting more from the arts department. It was a game of slicing thin pieces from an already small pie, and every time he did, he felt like he was failing someone. When he didn't elaborate, she turned back to the page. "You ever think about how much talent gets wasted because nobody bothers to notice it?" "Yes," he said quietly. "More than I'd like." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the tall windows like restless fingers. Somewhere in the back of the library, the ancient heating system let out a sigh. "You're close," he said, nodding at her work. "I know," she replied. "If I can just—" Her pencil halted mid-sentence. She stared at the numbers, the kind of stillness that comes when someone realizes they're standing on the edge of the solution. Then, with one swift motion, she drew a final curve, wrote a line of simplified symbols, and underlined it twice. "That's it," she breathed. Carver leaned in. He didn't have to check the math to see it was right. It was there in her eyes, the same way you can see a musician knows they've hit the right note before the last echo fades. "That's impressive," he said, almost in awe. She sat back, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Not bad for someone who's not qualified for the enrichment program, right?" The word hung between them like a dare. Carver straightened, his mind racing. He knew exactly why she hadn't been invited. The program's criteria, high standardized test scores, faculty recommendations, prior advanced coursework were supposedly neutral, but in practice, they favored students from certain neighborhoods, certain families, certain histories. It wasn't overt, but it was there. Always there. "You should be in it," he said finally. Her laugh was soft and bitter. "I should be, but I'm not. And you know why." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carver made a decision he hadn't planned to make when he walked into that library. Come to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to talk about changing that. Her eyes narrowed. You mean you're going to put me in the program? I mean, he said carefully, I'm going to make sure they can't keep you out. She studied him, as if trying to measure whether his promise was real or just another well-meaning phrase that would fade by morning. Finally, she nodded once. We'll see. He stood, glancing toward the darkened front desk. It's late. I'll walk you out. I can take care of myself, she said, gathering her things. I don't doubt that, he replied, but humor me. They walked in silence through the empty aisles, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. At the door, she paused, looking back at the pool of lamplight where her notebook had been. Thanks, she said quietly, though she didn't sound entirely sure why. He wanted to say you're welcome, but instead, he said, tomorrow, 8 a.m. She slipped out into the rain, hood up, disappearing into the night. Carver didn't sleep much after that. He kept replaying the image of her bent over that notebook, the sheer precision in her work, the quiet steel in her voice. By the time the sun rose, he had made another decision, one that would set off a chain of events far beyond that library. The next morning, Amara was in his office exactly on time. She wore the same hoodie, though now the sleeves were rolled up. She carried her notebook under her arm like a shield. You're serious about this? She asked before even sitting down. Yes, he said. And you're not worried about what people will say? He met her gaze. They can say whatever they want. I'm more worried about what happens if we keep doing nothing. For the next hour, they went through her work, her records, her test scores. On paper, she was more than qualified. The problem wasn't her, it was the unwritten rules no one admitted existed. I can't erase the past, Carver said, but I can challenge the process. And I can bring your work to the next board meeting. She arched an eyebrow. You think they'll listen? They'll have to, he said. Because I'm not just bringing your work. I'm bringing you. That earned the faintest flicker of a smile. You know this is going to make you unpopular, right? I've been unpopular before, he said, leaning back in his chair. I can live with it. But he knew this wasn't just about unpopularity. This was about challenging a system that had been comfortable in its quiet exclusions for decades. It would mean pushing against colleagues, trustees, even some parents who saw the enrichment program as their children's guaranteed advantage. And yet, the decision felt inevitable. As the meeting ended, he said, Amara, this might not be easy. There will be pushback. People will question you, question me. They'll say things that aren't fair. She looked at him steadily. I've been hearing things that aren't fair my whole life. I'm still here. And for the first time in years, James Carver felt the kind of clarity that cuts through fear. 3 days later, the board meeting was set to begin. It was held in the school's old auditorium, the kind with velvet curtains that smelled faintly of dust and tradition. Long oak tables lined the stage, nameplates gleaming under harsh overhead lights. The trustees were already in their seats, their posture radiating authority. Carver knew them well. He also knew which ones would smile at Amara's presence and which would see it as a provocation. He'd asked her to arrive 10 minutes early. She did, notebook in hand, hair neatly tied back, wearing a simple white blouse that made her look older than 17. She walked in with the kind of quiet composure that wasn't learned in classrooms. Some heads turned. A few eyebrows lifted. One trustee, Mr. Hollingsworth, leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered something behind a half-covered hand. Carver caught the flicker of irritation on Amara's face, but saw her straighten her shoulders instead of flinching. The meeting began as they all did: budgets, enrollment numbers, minor policy amendments. Carver waited, the folder in front of him growing heavier with each passing minute. When the chair finally said, Principal Carver, you have the floor, he stood. I'd like to bring to your attention a matter of equity in our academic programs, he began. His voice was steady, but his pulse pounded in his ears. Specifically, our enrichment program for advanced mathematics. Several trustees shifted in their seats. This was not new territory. They'd had these discussions before, always ending in vague promises and no real change. I'd like to introduce Amara Johnson, Carver continued, gesturing toward her. She's a senior here at Westfield, and one of the most gifted mathematicians I've encountered in my career. The room's focus turned to her. She didn't fidget. I've reviewed her work personally, Carver went on. Last week, she solved Dr. Feldman's advanced university-level problem set, a task that, To my knowledge, no current enrichment student has completed this semester. There was a murmur from the far end of the table. And yet, Carver said, letting the pause stretch, she has never been invited to join the program. The silence that followed was different now, not polite, but tense. Hollingsworth cleared his throat. With respect, James, the selection process is rigorous and merit-based. We have to maintain standards. Carver kept his voice calm. I'm suggesting that perhaps our standards have been applied selectively. Miss Johnson meets every written criterion and exceeds them. The only difference between her and our current members is the fact that no one thought to invite her. The chair, Mrs. Lang, leaned forward. Are you implying bias in the program's admissions? I'm stating it, Carver said. The room reacted, some with disbelief, others with uncomfortable shifting in their seats. Lang's gaze flicked to Amara. Miss Johnson, would you care to speak for yourself? Amara arose slowly, her notebook still in her hand. With respect, I'm not here because I want a favor. I'm here because I've done the work. I've done more than the work. And I'm tired of pretending I don't notice the patterns in who gets opportunities and who doesn't. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried to the farthest row of empty seats. I've heard people talk about potential and foundation, she continued. I know those words don't mean the same thing for everyone. I know what they mean when they're said about me. But I'm still here. I've stayed late. I've studied what wasn't assigned to me. I've broken rules just to learn. And I shouldn't have had to do any of that to prove I belong. For a moment, no one spoke. Hollingsworth finally said, Miss Johnson, no one is doubting your intelligence, but the process, she interrupted, is the problem. The chair's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. Carver took the opportunity. This isn't just about one student. This is about making sure our programs are truly open to all qualified students, not just those who fit an unspoken profile. I'm proposing we review our admissions process immediately, with Miss Johnson as a full member of the enrichment program effective this semester. A low wave of voices rolled across the table. Some trustees exchanged glances that said this will cause trouble. Others looked as if they'd just been handed the excuse they'd been waiting for to make a change. Lang finally rapped her gavel lightly. We will vote. The vote wasn't unanimous. It was 6-3 in favor. Hollingsworth voted no, as expected, but the yes votes carried, and it was done. Amara was in. Carver felt the tension in his chest loosen until he noticed the looks being thrown his way. This wasn't over. Word spread faster than he anticipated. By the next morning, the hallways were buzzing. Students whispered in corners, some curious, some impressed, some resentful. A few parents had already called the front office, their voices sharp with concern about changing standards. In the cafeteria, Carver overheard a senior boy from the enrichment program say loudly to his friends, Guess we're just letting anyone in now. Amara was at a table nearby. She didn't look up, but her pencil tapped against her notebook in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Later that day, he called her into his office. They're going to talk, he said. Some of it won't be fair. You need to decide how you want to handle it. She gave a small, wry smile. I've been handling it since I was 12. I'll be fine. Still, he could see the strain in her posture. Her first day in the program was a test, in every way. She walked into the advanced math classroom, notebook in hand, aware of every set of eyes tracking her. Dr. Feldman, a wiry man with a clipped beard, greeted her with polite formality. Miss Johnson, I understand you've been recommended. I solved your university problem set, she said evenly. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing more, instead gesturing toward an empty seat at the far end of the room. The lesson began. It was dense, layered, the kind of material that made most students furrow their brows. Amara took notes quickly, her pencil moving with confidence. When Feldman posed a particularly tricky question, no one raised a hand. No one except her. She walked through the solution clearly, logically, with an ease that made even Feldman pause before nodding. After class, one student muttered, "Show off," just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't turn around. By the end of the week, Carver started to notice a shift. Some students began asking her for help. Feldman privately told Carver, "She's the real deal. Might be the best I've had in years." But the pushback didn't vanish. One afternoon, a parent cornered Carver in the parking lot. "My son's been in that program since freshman year," she said sharply. "We worked hard to get him there. Now you're letting students in who didn't follow the same process. What does that say about fairness? Carver met her gaze. It says we're fixing something that should have been fair from the start. She didn't like that answer, but he didn't care. The real turning point came 2 weeks later during the school's academic showcase, a public event where enrichment students presented projects. Amara had been working quietly on hers, refusing to tell Carver the details. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage in front of parents, students, and faculty. On the projector behind her appeared a massive, elegant proof the same university-level problem set, expanded and generalized. I started this, she told the audience, because I wanted to prove something to myself. I'm finishing it here because I want to prove something to you that talent doesn't have a race, but opportunity too often does. She walked them through her solution step by step, her voice steady, her reasoning flawless. The room was silent except for the scratch of pens and the occasional intake of breath from those trying to keep up. When she finished, there was a pause, the kind of pause that feels longer than it is. And then applause. Not polite applause. Real applause. Carver scanned the crowd. Even some of the parents who had doubted her were clapping. Hollingsworth wasn't, but Mrs. Lang was. For a moment, the noise filled the room, and Amara stood there not smiling, not bowing, just holding her ground as if to say, I told you so. And in that moment, the school was silent in a different way, the kind of silence that comes when something shifts, and you know it won't go back. The days after the showcase felt different. It wasn't that racism had suddenly vanished from the halls of Westfield High, far from it. But something had cracked. The unspoken hierarchy that had kept certain doors closed now had a visible fracture, and through it, people could see possibilities they'd been told didn't exist. For Amara, it meant she no longer had to sneak into the library at night. She stayed late openly, sometimes with classmates who once ignored her but now lingered to compare solutions. Some came because they wanted help. Others came because they wanted to understand how she had done it, not just the math, but the audacity. One afternoon, as she was packing her notebook, a sophomore she barely knew approached her. My brother said you're the reason they're changing the program, the girl said. He's in 8th grade. He wants to try for it now. Amara wasn't sure how to respond. She muttered something about working hard, but the truth was, she felt a warmth she couldn't quite name. Carver, meanwhile, found himself in a different kind of spotlight. Parents who supported the change thanked him in hushed tones, as if afraid their approval might cost them something. Others sent emails demanding clarity about the new standards. He replied to each one, refusing to soften his stance. You opened a door, Mrs. Lang told him in her office one day. Just be prepared once it's open. You can't control who walks through. I don't want to control it, he said. That's the point. Still, he knew the pushback wasn't over. Hollingsworth had already hinted at revisiting the vote next year. Some teachers muttered about politics in the faculty lounge. But Carver had stopped losing sleep over their opinions. The real test came in spring. The state math championship, an event Westfield had attended for decades, was looming. Feldman nominated Amara for the team without hesitation. The roster went public on Monday. By Tuesday, rumors had begun. She's only there because they need to look inclusive. It's all for show. Amara heard them. She ignored them. The night before the competition, she sat at her kitchen table, reviewing formulas for the 100th time. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, came home late and watched her for a moment before speaking. You know, her mother said, I'm proud of you whether you win or not. Amara kept her eyes on the paper. Winning would be easier. Her mother smiled tiredly. Easy isn't what we do. The championship was held in a cavernous university hall, the kind that swallowed sound and made footsteps echo. Teams from across the state filed in, all wearing matching blazers or polos. Westfield's team stood in the middle, their navy jackets crisp. Amara's fit slightly loose, borrowed, since the school hadn't ordered hers yet. The individual round began. Numbers flashed on the projector, each question more complex than the last. Amara's pencil flew, her focus so complete she barely registered the ticking clock. By the time the final bell rang, her hand ached and her throat was dry. She didn't dare guess at her score. When the judges announced the results, she braced herself. 3rd place went to a boy from Fairfield, 2nd to a girl from Northridge, and 1st, Amara Johnson, Westfield High School. For half a second, she didn't move. Then the sound hit her teammates cheering, Feldman clapping hard enough to sting Carver on his feet. As she walked to the stage to accept the plaque, she caught sight of a few other coaches in the audience. Some looked genuinely impressed. Others wore the tight smiles of people rewriting their assumptions in real time. She didn't care. Back at school, the victory spread faster than the rumors had. This time, the talk in the hallways wasn't about why she was there, but about how she'd won. Carver overheard a freshman telling his friend, "She's the smartest person in this school." Even Hollingsworth, cornered in the teacher's lounge by Lang, muttered something that might have been congratulations. But the moment that stayed with Carver came a week later. He was in his office when he heard a knock. Amara stood in the doorway, holding the plaque. "I want this to stay here," she said. He frowned. "It's yours." "It's ours," she corrected. "If it's in my room, it's just mine. If it's here, maybe the next kid who thinks they don't belong will see it." Carver took the plaque from her. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He found a spot for it right by the window, where the afternoon sun caught the gold lettering. "That's a good place," she said. The school year ended with more changes than anyone had expected. The enrichment program's admissions process was rewritten. Standardized tests became one factor instead of the deciding factor. Faculty nominations had to be backed by a written justification. The roster for next year included 3 students from neighborhoods that had never been represented before. It wasn't perfect. Amara knew that. Carver knew that. But it was a start. On graduation day, Amara crossed the stage to accept her diploma. The auditorium was packed, the air thick with camera flashes and the smell of flowers. When her name was called, the applause was louder than most, not because she'd been a star athlete or class president, but because people knew what she'd done. Carver shook her hand as she passed. "You changed this place," he said quietly. She smiled just enough for him to see it. "We both did." Years later, long after she'd left Westfield, the library still kept a single desk lamp burning in the back corner after hours, a quiet tradition no one explained to new students. The plaque still hung in Carver's office, though it had been joined by others from students who followed Amara's path. And every so often, a student who thought they didn't belong would sit under that lamp, pencil in hand, chasing a problem no one had assigned, proof that sometimes the smallest crack in a door is enough to let the light in. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.